Hello and welcome. This course will introduce you to the Matlab language and show you some real-world examples of how Matlab is used. The course starts by introducing some fundamental Matlab commands, then focuses on importing and visualizing data, and finally provides some projects where you can use the skills you've gained. By the end of the course, you'll use Matlab to analyze the light recorded from a star to determine if it's moving towards or away from the Earth. Throughout the course, you'll be interacting with a web-based version of Matlab inside our training environment. It has a slightly different look and feel from Matlab Online or the desktop version of Matlab, but don't worry, you're using the exact same Matlab language. Enjoy the course.
Grace laughs at the waves, so I'm sure she'll be fine.
When you start Matlab, the default layout contains 3 panels: the Command window, Workspace panel, and Files panel. In the Command window, you can enter Matlab commands, and they're executed as soon as you hit Enter. The activities you've completed so far worked this way. Some commands create new Matlab variables, and these variables are displayed in the Workspace panel. Entering commands one by one in the command window is a quick way to try something out and see the result. However, solving problems often requires a sequence of commands. You can organize all your commands and their output together in a live script. To create a live script, click New Live Script in the tool strip. Enter your commands in the gray code box. Switch to text mode to add some description. You can now run multiple commands at once by clicking the Run button, which evaluates all the commands in order. By default, the output appears on the right. You can change where to display output, such as using Output Inline, where output appears immediately after the command that created it. Either way, you can see how your code relates to the output. If you click a result in the output pane, the command that created it is shown in the editing pane, and vice versa. Clicking items in the output pane can also make them interactive. You can also break your script into sections, allowing you to run just a portion of your code. To run a single section, click the Run Section button. Saving your live script saves the code, output, and descriptions. You can share this interactive document with other Matlab users so they can understand your ideas, run your code, and experiment for themselves. Or to share your results with anyone, regardless of whether they have Matlab, you can save your live script as a document viewable outside of Matlab. Different people have different working styles, so you can customize the desktop as you see fit. By default, the Files and Workspace panels are grouped, so you can see them side by side. Drag the panel's sidebar icon to ungroup it, or move it to other sidebars on the desktop. You can also minimize and restore a panel by clicking its icon. There are other panels available, and as you work in Matlab, new panels may be opened for you. If you ever want to return to the default layout, click Layout in the tool strip. In the rest of this course, you'll use live scripts to complete tasks. The command window and workspace panels are minimized, but you can open them anytime to try out commands or view variables.
The day I got found, a bunch of people came into the room.
Every variable in Matlab is an array. So, to program in Matlab, you'll need to know how to work with arrays. Referring to elements in an array is the first step. This is called indexing. Indexing is how you extract and modify values in arrays. The position of a value inside any array is called its index. You can use the index to extract particular values. For example, if you want the third element of the vector x, you type x parentheses 3. If you know the position of an element, you can also change the value. Here, we're changing the value at the third index to 1. You can also extract a range of values by using a colon with the first and last indices of the range. If you want to extract elements from a matrix, well, specify two indices instead. The first index is the row number and the second is the column. It's pretty common that you want to extract a whole row or a whole column from a matrix. When you use a colon on its own as an index, it stands for all, as in all the rows or all the columns. Here, we're extracting the first row and all the columns. And in this case, we're extracting all the rows of the third column. There's a lot more you can do with indexing, but for now remember that matrix indexing is row, comma, column, and vectors only need one index.
Because of the waves, it kept on pushing me to one side.
Suppose you're reading a friend or colleague's code, and you encounter a function you haven't used before. When you want to learn more about Matlab functions or capabilities, you can search for them. All Matlab functions have a supporting documentation page. These pages include supported calling syntaxes, a description of those syntaxes, and examples. For instance, the syntaxes show that you can use the rand_n function with one input to create a square matrix, or with two inputs to create a non-square matrix, like a vector.
I feel like I'm recovering very fine. My legs are very...
The Files panel lets you explore any files you have on your computer. If you want to import a file into Matlab, select the file and click Import Data, or just try double-clicking on it. If you double-click a mat file, the variables that it contains are imported into the workspace. If you double-click an image, it's imported as a numeric array of pixel values. If you double-click a spreadsheet, well, there are a lot more ways that data could be stored in Matlab, so the Import tool opens. A preview of the data is shown. The data that will be imported is highlighted in blue. Any missing data in the text file is highlighted in orange, and by default will be replaced with NaN, which stands for not a number. The Import tool will import this data as a table by default, but there are other options available. We'll use a table because the columns contain different data types, but the rows go together. With a table, you can import all the data into one variable in the workspace. It's common for the first row of your spreadsheet to contain headers for each column. The Import tool sees that and will use these as the table variable names. The Import tool also chooses an appropriate data type for each variable within the table. The name of your output variable comes from the file name. All of these defaults can be changed as needed. When you're ready, click the Import Selection button. Matlab imports the data and creates the variable in the workspace.
We're going to tell you about an extraordinary story of heroism and bravery.
All the scripts you've seen so far execute commands in order from beginning to end. But what if you only wanted to calculate the square root if x is positive? You could take out this line when x is negative, but then you'd need to add it back when x is positive. Instead, the code itself can determine if x is positive and behave accordingly. Now, if x is positive, this condition is true, and all the code will be run. And if x is negative, then the condition is false, and this line of code is skipped. This if statement is one way you can control the flow of your program. If-else blocks execute just one section of code from two options, or more. Sometimes, instead of skipping code, you want to repeat a set of commands multiple times. If you start copying, pasting, and modifying your code, well, it's probably time to use a loop. The most common kind of loop is a for loop, which uses the for keyword. The block of code within the loop will be repeated multiple times. In the first pass of this loop, the value of x is 1. In the second pass of the loop, the value of x is 2, and so on. In each pass, x changes value, stepping through each value in this vector. Once x gets to the last value, the loop executes one last time with the final value and then moves on. If your code is very simple, like just calculating the square of a bunch of numbers, you probably don't need to use a for loop. Remember that Matlab works with arrays naturally, so you can use Matlab's array capabilities to write clean code without having to use a loop. For cases when it's not so simple, for loops give you a way to repeat a set of tasks across collections of data.
And by this point, Austin, you're swimming, right? You are swimming for your life to get to shore.
You can learn a lot about a star, even though it may be 1,000 light years away, by examining the light that came from it. Using a diffraction grating, you can split a beam of light into its individual wavelengths, just like water droplets splitting sunlight into a rainbow. Measuring the intensity of light observed at each wavelength gives the star's characteristic spectrum. This is the spectrum of HD 94028, a faint star in the constellation of Leo. Notice this deep spike in the spectrum, which means not much light is radiated at this particular wavelength, around 650 nanometers. This is a common feature of many stars because hydrogen, a major component of most stars, absorbs light at precisely 656.3 nanometers. However, as you will discover in this project, this spike in HD 94028 spectrum, called its hydrogen alpha line, occurs at a slightly longer wavelength than 656.3 nanometers. This is because the star is moving away from the Earth. Just like a siren sounds higher as it comes towards you and lower as it moves away, a star's spectrum is blue shifted, that is, shifted to shorter wavelengths, if it's moving towards you, and red shifted to longer wavelengths if it's moving away. In this project, you'll use Matlab to find the observed wavelength of the hydrogen alpha line of HD 94028 and compare it to the known wavelength of the hydrogen absorption to determine how fast the star is moving away from the Earth. With precise spectral measurements over time, astronomers use this technique to discover the slight oscillations that demonstrate the presence of planets.